Yes, join computer audio. Are you not? Or I know using.
Okay, yeah, I'm not doing it.
Okay. Good afternoon, a very, very distinguished guests, and good afternoon to all who have joined us today on this very special episode of our Nigeria history series. I am enormously honored that you are all able to be part of this conversation about a very critical part of the future of our country, the role, the place of manufacturing in the growth of the Nigerian economy and the quality of life about the Nigeria history series, why we have it, and what we hope that it will accomplish. We have come to notice that a lot of young Nigerians and the Center for Values in Leadership was set up to help young people become more effective as leaders. A lot of young Nigerians don't have a fair grasp of how different sectors of the Nigerian economy has evolved. And this, we believe, is a challenge to the quality of decision making that can come out. It leads to the possibilities that history can continue to repeat itself with the attendant high costs. And I'll just give one quick little example. We, in one of our CVL series, during the course of last year, actually, we're focusing on a parastatal, one of the NMPC parastatals. And I mentioned to the chief executive of that parastatal the name of a certain gentleman who was actually the first chairman of that parastatal and who had gone on to make a remarkable contribution to policy in Nigeria long after he chaired that parastatal back in the 70s. Amazingly, this chief executive of this parastatal had never heard the name of this man. I was shocked, but that turned out to be quite true. Once I told him who the man was, he got really excited, but he had never heard the man's name. The man is still alive. The man was such a pivotal figure in the history of the of a parastatal, and so we have been on this series to help us to prepare younger people to have a better understanding of how things have evolved. Few sectors are as important in this regard as the manufacturing sector, where the early transitions of our country started. As many of us will know clearly, back in the 50s, what separated where we were coming from to where we seem to be going was the competition between the premiers of the various regions on industrialization. I like very often to tell MBA students the story of how the Ikeja Industrial Estate became a base for that competition and the rush of the premier of the Eastern region to set up Aba and Transamari in Port Harcourt to essentially respond to the premier of Western region starting the Ikeja Industrial Estate. And we know how the premier of Northern region set up an advanced Kakuri, and it became the hub of Nigeria's textile industry, even as Bompai in Kano was emerging. But manufacturing has suffered severe trauma. And part of the challenge of our conversation is where these troubles started from. And to have the privilege of the experience that we have today to reflect on this is one that we all should be very thankful for. And so I'm going to begin the conversation by turning to a man of enormous experience. Alhaji Bamanga Tukur did not only play a critical role in the ports sector in Nigeria, becoming the CEO of Nigerian Ports Authority at the time that the ports were critical for the import substitution industrialization strategy of our country. I, of course, worked for Volkswagen of Nigeria, and one of our great stories in those days was about how during the port congestion, we used to get these Chinook helicopters to go midstream in the Atlantic to pick up CKD sets and bring them into the bonded warehouse in the Volkswagen factory. These were the days that Alhaji Bamanga Tukur helped to clear the challenges we had with the ports. And in later years, he became Minister of Industries. Shortly after I had resigned my position at Volkswagen, and he tried to force me to withdraw my resignation. Interesting times to go. But let me ask Alhaji Bamanga Tukur to please begin us by giving his personal reflections, personal thoughts on what I like to call the rise and fall of manufacturing in Nigeria. And later down the conversation, I'll come into strategy and long-term strategy and why we are where we are. But I'd like to take the personal reflections of our special guests, beginning with Alhaji Bamanga Tukur and then turning to Engineer Charles Ugu, who was, of course, president of MAN, besides being minister in for industries. Alhaji Bamanga Tukur.
Thank you very much, Prof. I salute you and I salute your leadership. Yes, Nigeria missed the opportunity, really, of manufacturing country early enough because it failed to bring to fruition Ajakuta. Because this is important. They need this kind of industrial complex, they need energy, they need things which really bring manufacturing to fruition. Weak industrial development policy, neglecting important aspects of energy and raw material research. Clear laws, governing laws of economic growth that will ensure manufacturing is really focused to. And also our inability, I think, to provide materials like flat sheets for car assembly, engines for heavy industries, chassis for trucks. If we pay attention, by now, Peugeot in Kaduna, Volkswagen in Lagos, Leyland in Ibadan, Fiat in Kano, etc., would have been working and jobs would have been created to fast-track economic development. But to remember, when we submitted your resignation, which you are now talking about, I said to you, "Pa, you cannot go." He said to me, "Bamanga, the way things are, people don't take what is necessary to first." Because I had to leave Volkswagen because we need to move. I need to move. I was not happy because people like you, I thought at that time, it's very critical to ensure that we move to this kind of manufacturing sector. So these are issues I believe maybe they are too complex to maneuver or to navigate by the then policymakers. Because if we pay attention to fundamental things which I mentioned before, you have people who have the capacity, ability, and interest to promote that. We could have been further than where we are today. We have to tell them, please give job to whom the job wants, not who wants the job. You give the job to who the job wants, the job will be done. And we are in that kind of situation at that time. You don't question of where is he coming from, what country, what tribe, what religion, etc., etc. Give the job, need who can do it. And the people who mention the premier of Eastern region, the premier of Northern region, the premier of Western region, is at that time the job won this kind of people. And they came in willingly, forcefully, believing that now they've got what they want and have to achieve. This is just a part. Until we're able to understand, we need to really be clear in our mind what we want. We have our objectives. It should be clear. Devoid of all these sentiments, no sentiment of religion, sentiments of tribe, sentiment of region. That cannot work because these are manufacturing is not sentiment. Manufacturing is a reality. So I'm so happy that you now bring this to focus again. We hope that.
Yes, Ajit Babanga, we will come back to you several times more because of this conversation. But I'd like to just get the sentiment of Engineer Charles, who is a very unique person in that he was a manufacturer, he's a manufacturer, he headed MAN as president, he became Minister of Industry. In the course of this conversation, I've found several people who have had that kind of experience to be enormously frustrated people. My favorite example. When we did the series on health. Professor Yitai Olambo. Is Professor Yitai Olambo, who has served as Minister of Health, Organization. His expression of frustration was incredible. Maybe we can get a perspective, first of all, a general perspective on why we are where we are in manufacturing in Nigeria, considering, by the way, that 25, 30 years ago, back when I was at Volkswagen, we actually had a head start on China, from which we are now importing everything. And I have my theories about this, which I'll come back to. But your perspective. Engineer Charles,
did you hear me? Are you hearing me?
Okay, now I hear you. Yes, great. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the initiative. My very warm greetings and regards to His Excellency Bamanga Tuko, former Minister of Industry, and former many, many things. And Joe Makoju, who was a member of Council of Man, a great engineer who went from working for a foreign company to setting up an incredible conglomerate called Dangote Cement. I salute all of you with joy and happiness in my heart. Pat, thank you for taking this initiative, but allow me a small, brief recoup of the history so you can place things in context.
Yeah, yeah.
I would like to say that we started very well at independence with great striving in agriculture, in infrastructure development, education and health, in the way you suggested, Opera in the east, Awolowo in the west, and our powerful brother in the north, Ahmadu Bello. We were in a great hurry. We were doing many things right. We were moving very well, ahead of many economies. After the Civil War, a new beginning also commenced in every sector to rebuild, to catch up, focusing with enthusiasm, hope, and determination to develop the economy, all sectors. The locals, which is ourselves, the indigenous, we had woken up and started in partnership with foreign companies, joint ventures, entrepreneurial spirit that was very strong. This was supported and buoyed by capital inflows from overseas. Nigeria was a favored destination for new capital inflows. Huge constructions, projects followed the oil boom. Unfortunately, in 1985, some difficulties arose in our balance of payments management. We opted for devaluation. Thus began the slide to catastrophic failure. 1985 was the tsunami that destroyed everything we had built. You remember all the industries. You talked about VW. What about the Hebrews? What about ACOA, UNT in Kaduna, Arewa Textiles? I mean, I can name hundreds of them in every sector. In agricultural transformation, Aspirin Textiles, we were growing at leaps and bounds. But unfortunately, in the 35 years, we have destroyed the nascent industries and enterprises, and through the devaluation of our currency. When we made that detour from holding our currency stable to playing with the so-called devaluation and all the other elements, that was when we turned the wrong road. And then everything came down. That was the tsunami. You can trace all of them. Everything we have tried it. And we were building with enthusiasm. But you got the bankers who didn't have experience of production to take care of the exchange rate. That was the biggest problem. Infrastructure, we would have built it. We could have caught up with education, with all the elements. In my mind, Pat, this is the point that we went to a disaster. And all our industries came crashing. Remember Adebowale. Remember Omole. Remember Ferdinand Anagara. There are so many industries that we killed because of going. But what is annoying me is that we are still going in the same direction. Yesterday, they were still talking about dual exchange rates. Yesterday, in 35 years, haven't we learned that we are going the wrong direction? That this issue of devaluing the currency, depreciating the naira, isn't the way. Please allow me just to make this point. In 1985, 1987, Malaysia was at the same point with us. Malaysia. And George Soros had them by the balls for some investment they had made and tried to force them to devalue the currency. They said we would devalue once and we'll hold the economy firm. So they fixed the exchange rate of their currency and they got it right. And after that trauma, they continued their growth. In our own, we continue to devalue. Look, from $1 equivalent to 1 naira, we've gone down now where 500 naira is trying to buy $1. This is a disaster, it's a tsunami. Nobody can survive this. So my suggestion now is that after you get to it later on, we must now wipe the slate, clean the slate. In the elementary school, when we did something, the teacher will mark on our slate, BA, begin again. We must now wipe the slate, start from the beginning with the right management of the exchange rate. Because if the exchange rate is stable, we can borrow all the capital we need to build our economy. Nigerian products are sought outside Nigeria. For example, if you have soya bean today from Nigeria, the whole world will come to you because Nigeria doesn't touch GMO soya bean. Everybody wants soya bean, sesame seed from agriculture from here. Small scale assembly, labor intensive manufacturing, they will come to Nigeria. But we closed our doors, we devalued our currency, there's no stability. So on this first step, I would say this is where the trouble started. We must retrace ourselves, clean the slate, and start a new way. Another 25 years, the next 25 years, with a fixed exchange rate. That's number one issue. I will stop there first.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. It is important and very valuable that you give this recap and different perspectives to it come together. Interestingly, I was in Malaysia during the period that you are describing. I went from the World Bank annual meeting in Hong Kong in October 1997 to Kuala Lumpur, and Mahathir Mohamad, the then Prime Minister and still Prime Minister now, back return, I guess. Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar Ibrahim was the Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. They were both present at that World Bank annual meeting.
Yes.
I actually thought that they were deliberately playing good cop, bad cop. I think they were. Anwar was the kind of guy who responded to, the Soros game, kind of, and Mahathir was playing the hard line, hard ball.
The hard ball.
Of course, by the time I arrived in Kuala Lumpur, Mahathir was on tour of Latin America. He went from Hong Kong. Each time he gave a speech, George Soros went after the ringgit Malaysia, and the ringgit took a dip. The World Bank obviously took a more favor to the Anwar Ibrahim perspective. Eventually led to the fall of Anwar Ibrahim, I guess. But what is interesting, even though I'm not sure that I completely buy into a dirigist regime, what is interesting is that years later, the World Bank would acknowledge that Mahathir Mohamad's choices
was right,
were better choices and enabled Malaysia escape the Asian financial crisis earlier than Indonesia and some of the others.
Absolutely.
Interesting story we can go back to at some point, because I went to Kuala Lumpur. At that time, I spent some time with Bank Negara Malaysia, the Central Bank of Malaysia. I spent some time during that stay in Malaysia at that central bank. I knew there were even different opinions within the central bank in Malaysia at the time. But history will allow us to discuss all of these better. So let me move to Engineer Makoju. Engineer Makoju has seen manufacturing in Nigeria from all kinds of perspectives. I think I never let him forget the day that we were both sitting next to each other at the NECA meeting in 1994, I think it was. And I said something about the future of Nigeria that has come to pass. But anyway, let's get Engineer Makoju's perspective on the rise and fall of manufacturing in Nigeria, literally speaking. Why did it happen? How did it happen? What's your reflection?
Thank you very much, Pat. Let me really most sincerely thank you for bringing us together to talk on this very most important topic. It's not just what you're doing today, but what you seem to have devoted your life to, your passion in really not only believing in this country, but working very hard to get it right. You have not given up, and many of us share this aspiration with you. So thank you very much for making this possible. I can't tell you how excited I am to have this opportunity to rub shoulders with some people who have played very important parts in my life. You know, like Bamanga Tuko, Chief Ugo, who are also on this program. You've already had them speak. They, like you, are people whose passion is Nigeria. And they've been, you know, I'm happy to hear they haven't given up and are always ready to come back to the fray, which gives me confidence that in the end, we will get it right. Nation building, I came to realize at one point, doesn't happen in one day. As a young man, I was, you know, very impatient. I want things to be changed immediately, but I've come to learn that it may take time. The Chinese took 2,000 years. That is no excuse, though, for repeating mistakes or not learning from other people's experience. We should make the process quicker. For want of repeating what others have said, I'll try to avoid that, because already from Alhaji Bamanga Tuku and Engineer Egu, you've already had, even from Pat's own introduction, quite a bit of the story. Really, where I just want to go to, I just want to, for 1 minute, if we can just reflect. And if I just want to share one thing, that in all our aspirations to see this country become a great emerging economy, like the Asian tigers, right from day one, everything that was needed was in place. We had more than those countries had. Even the capacity, human capacity. Nigerians are all over the world turning other economies around. So we had it all, but why hasn't it happened? I just for 1 minute ask, if you go back into our history, you will find that in all indices of performance, at one time or the other, in every two indices, Nigeria has done well. What I'm saying is, all the things that should be in place, if you look back, at one time or the other, there were spells when we did those things right. And the simple conclusion I want to draw from that is that we can do it. We can do it, and may I also say we will do it. It's a question, I think what we're here today trying to find is why, when and why and how can we get it right? We're talking about the future. If we can put the past behind us and see how we can correct things and get it right. But to plan for the future, you must know not only about the present, but also about the past. And that is why we're also spending some time looking back. We went as far as, normally when you talk of development, especially economic development, countries are grouped as underdeveloping, developing, and developed. We have been struggling in the underdeveloped, trying to get into the developing status. One very fundamental fact is, in the history of all countries, all those who have succeeded in transiting from underdevelopment to developed status, the one common path all have used is industrialization. You can go and study. No other person has done it. There's no other magic. It has been that. Even the most advanced countries, they go back to their history. And so that's been the challenge for us in Nigeria. And we will just have to, get that right, that there's no way around it. We've already been told about our history, our colonial history. When we look back with some nostalgia, during the colonial times, things actually worked. But what we must remember is that we were actually an extension of our colonial masters economy, which was working. We had a role, to concentrate on providing the raw materials. We did it very, very well. But, we're still in a state of a dependency. And that's why we fought for independence and say we want to take our own affairs in our hand. And it's that journey we've not really made much progress on. So if we look back, we actually had a very good economy. Our currency during was exchangeable. We had a strong economy. We were leaders in various, especially in agriculture. The transport system worked, the rails worked. There was security, there was peace, good education, good health. So it did happen. But of course, when we became independent, our new leaders, we've already had their desire to now make this leap to actually become sovereign, because all that success under a colonial status were subjugated people, were not an independent. Now we became independent, we wanted to reflect it also in our economy so that we are truly sovereign, which is still the battle we are fighting today. And may I say, like I said earlier, when it comes to industrialization, we did get it right in the 70s. Virtually, we're coasting, we're on track. The one indices that is used to measure whether a country is now, has now made the jump from underdevelopment to developing status is the contribution of manufacturing to GDP.
To GDP, yeah.
And there's a usual benchmark. The usual benchmark is usually say, once you are getting to around 12%, 12.5%, you can then be classed as, a developing economy. Go and check. You will find that in the 70s, Nigeria actually came close. We got to 12.5%.
Actually.
Right. So we're virtually there. Those were the days we had the breweries, we had the steel rolling plants, we had 7 cement companies, detergent factories, you name it. The economy was ticking. So when I said earlier, we got it right before we can get it right again, I'm still a strong believer in that. But then, coming back to the present, the first thing is what went wrong. Some of them have already been touched on by previous speakers. I think a major one was that devaluation, the so-called structural adjustment program. The whole idea of that was that we would look inwards and begin to, depend more on what we produce for ourselves. But against the background of an oil economy that was printing free money, that could never work, and it failed woefully. Since then, we've been trying to pick up the pieces. I think I don't want to spend too much time on the past, but really going forward, one thing I just want to share on this platform is why things don't work. Too often, we put very vital, critical parts of this country's government in the hands of the wrong people.
Yeah.
And when I say the wrong people, I mean you have people who don't have the relevant experience or
education,
track record in that key area to head it. And everybody keeps talking about leadership. I'm not even talking of leadership at the highest level now, but even at the level of running the economy. We're not getting it right. So I think if the CVL and other organizations like that, we need to draw attention to this. If there's going to be some method where we can actually have some standards for selecting, the the people who steer the wheel in critical areas of the economy and make it an open public system, communicated and shared with the people, it will help. It will help. The other thing is, in terms of policies and strategies, we are not short of the right policies and strategies. We have got them right. We have the biggest brains, economists, the advice, and we've formulated these policies. And when it comes to implementation, it is
and the will to implement.
Yeah, implementation. And what is the problem with implementation? Every time, usually if you want to correct any weakness in your system, the process of correcting it, there will be some pain. Anytime the pain is just coming a little, we fall back. You know, Nigerians, the leader cannot mobilize people to take the pain. Two things. Once we feel the pain, we start going back to the drawing board. The second thing is vested interest. When the policies have been implemented and it begins to affect the vested interest of powerful people, they kick. So those two things, we've got to just have a way of mobilizing Nigerians and really drawing attention that this is. So that's why we have a lot of history of U-turns. You know, good policies in place. When when it's just beginning to take effect, it is sabotaged quietly, sometimes by the people put there to implement them. So these are, I think, from what we are doing here, if we're going to come up with things we want to advise going forward, these are areas I would like to advise.
Talking about that, if I might just step in and say, in one of the previous NHS sessions, I actually suggested, I think it was the healthcare one, we had like 6 former health ministers, and everybody was complaining, and I about the same point that you've just made about a new government comes, the wrong persons get in the place, all the good ideas from the past are just completely abandoned, mocked up, and so on. And I said to them, if you have a council, whatever committee, group of former ministers, and you all get together informally and chat about the way things are, and there's a commitment to the country and its future, and some new government comes, appoint somebody who doesn't know what he's doing, you can, as a group, make a statement to the country, or first of all, go to whoever is at the head of and say, look, this is our experience, this is what we think is the consequence of what is about to be done. And if, for whatever reason, I don't think any reasonable person will refuse that word of experience as counsel. But if they fail, then put your voice in the public domain as former leaders in this sector, that it will have impact. But that's part of the challenge. Anyway, as I move on, before we come around back, and we're going to be going to Professor Osita Obu, let me, in fact, pick up on another point that Engineer Makoju has made about the history coming out of colonial heritage. Obviously, the plan of colonial administration was not to industrialize Nigeria. It was, as he said, to make Nigeria a source of raw material for the metropole. And there was practically no industrialization during colonial rule in Nigeria. I think the only factories of any worth or note were Nigerian breweries. It was really a place to add water to some concentrate brought from abroad, and federated motor industries. And so when self-government came, one of the passions of the new political leaders who were Nigerian was industrialization. Yeah. So this is what triggered Chief Obafemi Awolowo's conception of an industrial estate, which is the Ikeja Industrial Estate, and then the response of Dr. Michael Okpara with Aba and Port Harcourt Transamadi, and the Sadauna with Kakuri, and so on and so forth. Dr. Pius Okibo remarkably writes in his book on Nigerian public accounts that the marketing boards, Western Nigeria, Eastern Nigeria, Northern Nigeria marketing boards, had significant reserves in their accounts in London. And between self-government and independence in 1960, those accounts had been drawn down almost to zero. As a matter of just testing the waters, I always ask MBA students, what do you think happened to the money? Their instinctive reaction was, then don't chop the money, which is of course not true. What happened was that the new Nigerian leaders drew down those reserves to begin to industrialize the country. And the transition happened so well, so quick, that by 65, Nigeria was a manufacturing hub at a global level. I mean, imagine that Nigeria just continued from where we were in 1965 in manufacturing. You know, I'm not sure that, you know, China would have done much more than us. Indeed, and in fact, I often like to make the point, and Professor Bu will, I think, like to begin looking at that point, because Paul Collier, who has run the Center for African Economies at Oxford for many, many years, Paul Collier came to interview me at Volkswagen in 1987-88, because I had been making some statements that were unusual from the grind in policy talk in Nigeria. Statements which today, by the way, rhyme with what the Chinese economist Justin Lin likes to refer to as latent comparative advantage, you know, back in those days. And 25 years on, UNIDO asks Professor Collier to look at the rise of manufacturing in China and what Africa can learn from it. Paul Collier almost cynically remarked after that study, and I was speaking with him, he said, well, China basically did what you said Nigeria should do 25 years ago. Between Dr. Pius Okibo and the Nigerian public accounts in the transition from the colonial economy to the modern economy, and what we failed to do that China eventually did, what do you think really is fundamental challenge that we have with manufacturing? I know your friend at Cambridge, the South Korean economist, who wrote Bad Samaritans, Yeju Chang, has taken a different perspective on this same matter. But what is your perspective? Because Professor Stobu was Minister for National Planning, Chief Economic Advisor under President Obasanjo. So, let's start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah,
we can.
thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening. First of all, Pat, thank you for this invitation. Alhaji Bamanga Tuko, your son is still around, though. I have not disappeared. I apologize. You have not seen me. Is the way things are, but I'm going to come so that we can have tea and have conversation. Good to see you, Engineer Ugo Makonjola. It's been a while.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, this is an interesting conversation. When you invited me, in fact, 2 days ago, I was saying, why is Pat bothering people with manufacturing? We have insecurity in the land. Things are not working, and all he wants to discuss is the manufacturing. But you already know that manufacturing is also my passion, because I have always said, and I continue to say, that without a strong manufacturing sector, the idea that you will lift millions out of poverty is a non-starter. It will not go anywhere. It has never happened. It will not happen. So I think it's important that we are paying attention to this sector that is so critical. I did a piece on post-COVID management of the Nigerian economy, and I said the starting point, any nation that will survive post-COVID will be nations that produce things. China established a 1,000 bed hospital during COVID in less than 2 weeks. Reason? Because everything needed to establish that hospital was available in the country. If you were going to do a 20-bed hospital in Nigeria where you have to import everything, it will take 6 months or 1 year. So I think we should not overemphasize. But let's return back to the subject matter. And I've categorized my thinking in various ways, just to put blocks around what I've already been said. You know, we moved from knowledge independence to knowledge dependence. Post independence, once we got our independence, the early leaders, there was a convergence between the intelligentsia, the elite, the scholars, and those who were governing. That convergence was what created the plans.
The momentum.
We moved from planning to unplanning. Volkswagen was not an accident. Ajokuta was not an accident. Leyland was not an accident. There was a plan. There was the first national plan and the second national plan. The truncating of these plans essentially started the deindustrialization. So the structures were being put in place. When you begin to diminish the role of the state, you know, people say government has no business in business. I say that's rubbish.
Rubbish.
Total rubbish. What they mean to say is that government should not run business. That's fair. But as for whether government has business in business, government has serious business in business, because they set the tone, the policies are theirs, the environment is theirs, they direct. In fact, I was speaking last time, and people were talking about the private sector is the driver of the economy. I said, but you have to create the vehicle first before you get a driver. The state is so critical in directing manufacturing, in directing industrialization. You are talking about China. You're talking no country, in fact. In 2012, I'll give you one quick example. Obama was giving the State of the Union address in 2012. And he said that the technology with which they are mining shale oil in North Dakota and places came from a 30-year investment of the federal government of America. 30-year investment, investing on technology that the private sector will use. So it leads me to the third point. The first point I made was we moved from knowledge independence to knowledge dependence, that other people know and continue to know a lot more about this economy than us. And by the way, that knowledge dependence is still persisting, because we're talking about history, you're talking about now and the future. I have just learned that a group of young people are going to come to Nigeria from Britain to do our development plan, because David gave us the money. I mean, when you hear things like this, you begin to shake your head. We don't have people in this country that can do our own plan. Then we were told planning was now an archaic instrument, it should not be done, which is wrong. I think we are returning back to this planning, but whether we do it right is another thing. The third point is we moved from industrial policy to no policy, to the so-called free market. And without a strategic industrial policy, all we needed to do was to modify our import substitution strategy, redefine it, rearticulate it in the new circumstances we found ourselves. But to throw the baby with the bathwater was a big mistake. By the way, I hope you know that after so many years, the World Bank acknowledged that the social adjustment was a mistake. In fact, some of this have led, there was a discussion among the Scandinavians as to whether who pays for misadvice, whether we shouldn't set up a fund for when external agencies give advice that don't work. If you remember the case of Mozambique, when they kept telling Mozambique, you are the largest producer of cashew, but you shouldn't process cashew, just ship it to India because they have comparative advantage. Eventually, with a new president of the World Bank, they had a consulting firm that confirmed that that was the wrong advice. And the issue became, we've lost time.
There should be new reparation for wrong advice. Reparation for wrong advice.
So those things were there. Once you diminish the state, once the state ran away and people began to sing that, hey, you have no business in business, and people bought it wholesale. The idea was that the state was if you look at Malaysia, if you look at Indonesia, if you look at China, classically, because what did China do? There is what I call settled technology. And that's why manufacturing is so important, because it is in manufacturing that technology dynamism takes place. It is in manufacturing you begin to acquire the know-how. And from manufacturing, it dissipates to other sectors. So what they did was, there are technologies that are already in the public domain. How to make a car, how to make an air conditioner, all these things are settled. You don't need to go to the laboratory to research them. The question is, do you have enough engineers on the ground, enough scientists on the ground, enough skilled workers so that they can download, adapt, adopt, copy, imitate? Those are the issues. And the state is often the leader sending the signal that these things are where we want to go. So if the state shrinks, runs away, then you have yourself into, and I think one point was made by either part or someone else about competitive federation. Competitive federation meant, like he said, something arose in Ikeja, somebody in Enugu said, oh, no, I think we need similar. Then in Kaduna, somebody said, oh, no, we have to, we lost it. The states were no longer seeing themselves as centers of prosperity. They do not see themselves as engineering manufacturing revolution. Many states in Nigeria are bigger than countries. So it is imperative, and that's where the quality of leadership also comes in, that people must begin to think that everything is not federal government. There are state governments, there are local governments. In fact, we have mapped the entire country, and there are raw material in all the 774 local governments of this country, in each local government, where manufacturing can take place. But it requires this concerted effort. During the planning process, an institution like NISA was central in the first and second national plan. That institution predates independence. It was even West African Institute for Social and Economic Research before it became Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research. Now, the same planning ministry under which NISA exists will ignore NISA and go and get some young boys from UK to come and do our planning. So I think part that the point, the essence of history is to remind us that there were things we did right. The things we did right, we didn't continue. We truncated them because someone else said, you were not on the right path. If you did A, B, C, D, A, everything will fall in place. And I used to remind the economists that our science is not an exact science. And we should speak with some degree of humility because we are very good at after the fact. I was at Harvard for a course and I was teasing the lecturer because he said they lost a lot of money during the financial crisis. And I said, whoa, with all the brains at Harvard, how come you couldn't predict that this was coming? He thought I was cheeky. So
is he frozen?
Hello?
Yeah, I think he's frozen. Okay, while we're waiting for him to connect up back, I think that part of the point that he is making is fundamental to the conversation we're having. We had a great debate in our country when we got into a structural logjam in the early 80s. One of the results of some mismanagement of things around oil, because oil became the major problem with our economy. The industrialization that took place from 1956 through to 65 was largely without the free capital, if you will call it that way, my usage, free capital from oil. And they were appropriately deployed and produced the right kinds of results. When oil began to be a factor in our economy from the 70s, I think that there was a certain loss of concentration by the managers. We mentioned when Alhaji Bamanga Tukur came earlier, the crisis in the ports. Obviously, because there was so much cash coming in from crude oil, the managers of the economy did not appropriately look at capacity, for many things. We got into a situation where we didn't plan expansion of the ports when we were importing all the cement in the world. Unfortunately, Alhaji Damchida became a victim of that, unfairly in my view, but there's many views. I wrote a PhD thesis around this stuff, around 1981. And I went around talking to all of these super permanent secretaries, Chivasiodu, Aida, Elijah Med, Joda, all of them. I spent time talking with them about how all of these evolved during this period. Now, once we then ran into a structural logjam as a result of how we did not manage the influx of oil money well. I mean, what we could have done, as the example of Norway teaches us so well, and even Botswana, which had the fastest growing economy in the world between 1968 and 1980, literally, as a result of diamond exports, is to be able to, recognizing our absorptive capacity, either invest some of that money abroad, put them in savings, systematically deploy these resources that were coming in. We spent money in a way that led to crisis. Now, when the crisis became a structural issue, what we then did was turn to this advice from the World Bank, IMF. Now, the debate around that time, and I think it's very important to remember this period, the debate was whether or not to take an IMF loan, an adjustment loan. There were many people who thought, no, IMF is wicked. Let's just not talk to them. But the reality was that we would just run ourselves into a point where we would be shut out of international trade, and what base we had would die. Many of us argued that point in what then led to the so-called structural adjustment program. But now here comes the second stage, which is the point that Paul Collier likes to make about what I suggested Nigeria should do back then, which we did not do. World Bank people said the problem with us is that planning, you can't predict everything. So if you plan, you will not get the measures right. Soviet Union was the model of where planning went wrong. Now, somehow they managed to forget, and some of us pointed it out back then, that companies plan in America. A company that doesn't have a corporate plan is not taken seriously. Companies plan. So it was not only Soviet Union's model of planning. The totalitarian Marxist model of planning was what was not the best way forward. Instead, we completely abandoned planning. And that complete abandonment of planning is at the heart of the crisis, in my view, that we have been experiencing. What I said to Paul Collier when he talked to me in 1987 or 88 was, in my view, we probably don't need a blanket industrial policy or the so-called import substitution industrialization, where we put these heavy tariff bans, rates or bans, this kind of protection. We should select specific industries that we want to dominate the global economy in. Absolutely. There should be areas in which our country has factor endowments. For example, given motor industry where I was in, I suggested to him that if we were not competitive in building the whole car at this point, if we just did a deal with Volkswagen, Peugeot, and co. So Nigeria is competitive in rubber production. If you just take rubber, invest massively in rubber production, and become the sole or major suppliers of the rubber components needed by these companies in their worldwide production, Nigeria will earn more money than we were earning from crude oil, from just rubber components manufacture. But we're not exporting rubber. We're manufacturing rubber components going into cars produced worldwide. These were the things I said to Paul Collier in 1987 or 88. And this is precisely what the Chinese looked at, the things that they could do well, brought in equipment, technology. And the second thing I think that's very critical in my view is training of people. The role of our universities in providing the appropriate manpower prepared to go into manufacturing. And that's where I was hoping to drive Osita to, but his network has failed. But coming back to Alhaji Bamanga Tukur to ask this question about the relationship between education, manpower, and building up manufacturing. And I'd like to connect it up with intra-African trade. Alhaji Bamanga has been, for many, many years, involved with intra-African enterprise collaboration as a practicing business person in his role as the president of the African Business Roundtable for many years. Aggregation across borders is critical for Africa to be able to produce the kinds of volumes of manufacturers that can engage and compete globally. If we produce blue jeans in Nigeria, in the short run, we might not produce enough to be able to deal with Walmart that needs 1 million pieces of blue jeans a day, for example. But if we could arrange production such that Ghana is producing some parts of this, so Togo is doing this, we are aggregating across borders, and a huge company like a Marubeni, and those kinds of trading companies that the Japanese set up, were enabling us now access global markets, we can become dominant in manufactured exports. But we have seemed to fail to achieve this in Africa. With the benefit of your experience, what do you think are the impediments? So there are two different questions, one on education and how it facilitates manufacturing, and second on intra-African trade and aggregating across borders for competitiveness on global value chains for Africa.
Thank you, Pat, as formally call you always, with Charles, with a friend of mine who reminded me that when the sun set, the man died. So somebody can tell you that he's there with you. Now, they've taken us through what I call the memory lane. I tell you, what you're asking now means the power of market, the power of trade, the power of free movement. You see, market is a place where the willing buyer and the willing seller come together. Nobody bring them. They could have done so if they have not been allowed to freely move. What we are saying now, if we aggregate what we have, if we dominate trade, because this is where the situation comes to fruition, i.e., we sat down in the market, willing buyer, willing seller. What do? We establish trade. It's so important in the life of any economic development. If we do that through the aggregation, which you mentioned, like saying what is our competitive, what is our competitive advantage? So that we take it, let us produce tires, so that instead of producing Volkswagen. Now, this means we need market. So if always we can do that, and this is where you don't have a problem of, because the willing buyer and the willing seller, they are always a tandem. What is really we need is the knowledge to know where things could happen. Nobody can tell me business, a government has no business. When I had the opportunity of addressing the United Nations General Assembly, the chairman asked me, said, Mr. Tugu, we understand that primarily you are a businessman. I said, yes. Politics is good for business and business is good for politics. The two go together. Like my friend now explained, business, government has business in business. Now, these are necessary. They have to be shifted from time to time in order to make sure that we do not leave our flank open. Facilitate dynamic process of technological innovation. That's necessary. Technology. They say knowledge is power. So if we knowledge power, then it means that whatever we do, we need that power in order to aggregate what we need to do. Skill development. What is lacking now in Nigeria mostly? We tend to believe that you have a paper in Harvard, in Oxford, is what is required, a low degree. It's not true. The thing is that you need that technology basically, because if you have got a low degree and you done everything you need to do to advise, suppose you come we want even your own electrical affair to be fixed, or your car. What do? You are looking for that mechanic on the roadside. If you don't get to fix, even though you have a low degree, even though you are an engineer, low engineer, but you do not have the practical skill. We need to develop that. They are very, very important. Now, all those who spoke now, they are my friends. I know how much they really like to see their country develop. So patriotism is something we must all embrace, but with peace, with unity, with focus. Let us not scatter ourselves all over the place thinking that, oh, let us do this, this, and that. No, we can take anything we can do better and do it best. Every time I read somebody in Nigeria, it was wonderful in NASA. Somebody in Nigeria has done wonderful in designing car. So, if it is the case, let us not really underestimate our ability to do things. So, let us now listen to people experience like that sitting down with you here. Tap their experience and their knowledge in order to go forward. Fundamentally, nothing in this world cannot be done. If you take it, you can. Believe me, we can. So, Pat, I would like to thank you most sincerely for inviting me. And not only that, I'll be able today to see my good friend Charles, my good friend Osita, my good friend Mukajolu, all these people. I've not had from them for a long, long time. Please stay healthy. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.
Thank you very much. We're going to try very hard to stay safe, and we will see you very soon.
Thank you.
Let me turn very quickly to Engineer Makoju. The Dangote Group, collaborating with German groups on skills production, has been trying to develop skills. I know that many manufacturers, Nigerian breweries, for example, I know their program, they take people who have come out of the universities because the stuff they are coming out with doesn't quite fit. They provide them 1 more year or 2 more basic training. Then they select the best. They would have added value to those people. What does manufacturing need to do to get skills fit for play out of the system? How do universities need to act so that if we're going to revive manufacturing, we won't have the kind of skills shortages that are preventing some investors from coming here because they think the skills are not here, in some areas of manufacturing activity. Engineer Joe Makoju. Is he frozen? Okay. I don't know if Engineer Ugu can please take on the same question, skills and manufacturing, and the mismatch that tends to exist and the impact on investors, because there are many investors from abroad who look at Nigeria and they say there aren't enough skilled people to make investment in a particular kind of manufacturing industry area attractive.
There is a disconnect. Definitely, there is a disconnect. And we need the skills, we need the abilities that the new industries are looking for. The new industries are looking for knowledge and skills to work. We are too far gone in the negative side of industry. That is, most of our industries have collapsed. The carcass that are available are not applicable anymore. We have to retool. So we need to now start from the beginning. Do we put priority on agri-processing, process agricultural produce into things that we need locally and things we can export within our region? We missed the train on petrochemicals. If we had a lively petrochemicals industry in Kaduna or Warri or Port Harcourt, you would then say we can undertake competitive manufacture in plastic packaging. We lost that train as well. In the metal side, we also lost that. So my view is that we now have to set up a new priority. This kind of meeting we had today, we can meet again and set a new priority and say the next 10 years, next 15 years, we're going to concentrate in this area. See the way the Chinese have now moved on to solar and all the solar panels, all the solar technology, the cabling, everything is coming from China. We need to find something that we can play a strong role, we can dominate. We talked about rice, soybean, things that we can sell in our neighborhood in West Africa. But we are not galvanizing ourselves in the right way. But please, let me make one important area that is worrying me. In making these discussions about manufacturing, we must recognize that peace and security is assumed. It's number one assumption that we have peace and security. If you need to reform the polity, restructure the polity, do those things the government needs to do so that the polity can go on. So that we don't talk about major political upheavals. Anybody who wants to come to Nigeria says, oh, I'm not sure that the country will be together. Conclude that transaction, conclude that discussion, and we have peace, we have stability in any form you want, whether it is confederation, whatever you want, but get it to work. The government should concentrate on the basic infrastructure of power, defense, all of those things. But allow the private sector, through a stable platform of fixed exchange rate, to borrow money from abroad. There is money available at lower interest for Nigeria to do things, to start rebuilding, to start again the new technologies that are coming in. The way you machined steel in the old days is not the same that people are doing it here. We are now doing spark erosion. We are doing a number of new technologies. We've got to make ourselves relevant in those. So the universities will help, and the technical institutions will help with retooling and retraining of manpower. We should now get the macroeconomics right so that we can borrow money from outside. Borrow money today, pay in 10 years. Let that stability be predictable so that government doesn't have to find all the money to do the development in our economy. We cannot get money from outside. If I'm running a healthy business, I can borrow money, knowing that I will pay it at the exchange rate of X 5 years from today, so that we can have money to do things. But one area Nigeria is good. We have young people who are keen to go, who are desirous for progress, who want to learn, who want to invest, who want to risk. We mustn't frustrate that dynamism. We mustn't. That enthusiasm must not be frustrated. So we need to try and solve this problem quickly. Otherwise, it will lead to frustrations. So on my side, I would like to conclude by saying government must be involved in the peacemaking process, stability. Government must be involved in infrastructure, but don't do too many things. Do power. Do power. Do one or two things that you can do. And then allow the subunits of the federation to be competitive, to start doing things. Let them use their resources to do things in the way and participate and promote investments in the way they think is viable. And then we retrace our steps and look at what areas we can be competitive. At the moment, we are so far down. Manufacturing is less than 3% of the GDP now, honestly, and it's painful. So we need to try and get back to basics. So in moving forward, of course, universities will be brought into it, technical institutions will be brought into it as well. But we need capital. That capital will not come from Nigeria the way it is. And please, let me just say one thing that I didn't say earlier. We must fight the temptation to print money, but the government printed money. there was no value to those money. Then they turned around and start saying we have too much liquidity, and we start chasing our tail in a vicious circle of interest rate and exchange rate and inflation. It is self-induced damage to our economy. We must stop printing money. We must link the productive sector and the results and benefits of production to the value in the economy. You must not print money. If you, because you're getting dollar money and you start printing money and it's telling me you're going to do 500 naira to the dollar, that is the most silly kind of thing to do anymore. So we must now remove those things we got wrong. Those exchange rate manipulation and all must go away, and we now start putting the right sweat and the right development initiatives in our economy. That was my own comment.
Yeah, thank you so very much. To make the point, by the way, these conversations will continue for the next 8 weeks. Every other Sunday, we'll be dealing with the issues of the manufacturing sector. We'll even come down to specifics, pharmaceuticals manufacturing, and that sector, this sector. I think that this is a very important conversation that we must really burrow deep into to revive where we're going to. Incidentally, for the next session, Dr. Remi Aribisala, who was at the Raw Materials Research and Development Council, will join us, will be part of that conversation to help deal with the linkages between raw materials and our factor endowments and areas that we can be globally competitive on the value chains of. Now, Professor Wu is back, and a couple of these conversations have developed from when he was cut off, and it would be good to get his chip in, both finishing his old thoughts and coming to the point I had raised about education and skills and the manufacturing sector revival. So Osita, could you come right back in? Unmute yourself, unmute. Yeah, you're still muted.
Pat, I'm back to
Okay,
Joe. Pat, I'm back.
Oh, you're back, eh? Okay, all right.
Okay, now I am, yeah.
Okay, after Osita, you come back on.
Yes, I was rounding up my thought when, what do you call it, Abuja electricity took light. Okay. And of course, once they took light, my internet went off. But to round up that conversation, I was saying that having gone through what I stated earlier, the only thing left on that part was institutions. We have created zillions of institutions that will have assisted manufacturing. But one of the things I even said to the present government, previous government, is that we have coordination failure. Raw Material Research Development Council is doing something different from the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, different from Nigerian Exim, different from import, what they call it, Bank of Industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our colleague, former minister, was talking about borrowing from abroad. You don't need even to borrow from abroad. There are institutions. If all this money that the central bank is using for all kinds of interventions are given to the Bank of Industry, and the Bank of Industry has a focus on certain, that's why what Pat is suggesting about sectors. Because what happens is that there are areas in which latent competitive advantage exists, dynamic competitive advantage exists, meaning you don't have it now, but you can create it.
Yes.
So those investments can be made with money that is here. The Bank of Industry is set up squarely to support manufacturing. But when there are dissipating efforts in different directions, you'll find that there's no concentration and no output, and the critical technological evolution we expect in certain sectors of manufacturing will not occur. But let's move to education. Barack Obama asked Steve Jobs, why was iPhone manufactured in China. Because as you know, every leader wants manufacturing because it creates decent jobs in their economy. And there are a couple of lessons. Steve Jobs answered, show me the engineers. That's the summary of his answer. This was actually in 2012 written up in the New York Times. So you can find this story. The story was that the new iPhone was coming up and Steve Jobs was not happy and went to his office and said, you guys are going to be fired if we have already given people a deadline when these phones will be out. And the executives thought there's no way we can produce the type of phone Steve Jobs is asking us for in the time he's asking us for it. And they flew to China. So here you see a manufacturing concern going to China. When they got to China, what did they see? They were able to recruit 8,000 engineers, world-class engineers, not just any engineers, in 2 weeks to supervise about 12,000 workers willing to work 12 to 15-hour shifts. And there was almost like a ready-made factory. This is where, again, the state comes in. Certain stages, things have been set up. These engineers were already trained. There was no delegation from China to America to seek for investor. Investor came to China because things were set up. So the critical importance of scale, if you have a conglomeration of scales, engineers, and skills now includes attitude and values, people who have the appropriate work ethics, investors will come. You don't need to look for them. I was in Aba to give a lecture on Aba. And one of the things I suggested was our Aba brothers and sisters may be reaching their limit. As I used to tell the president when we were in government, that there's a limit to common sense, after which you must now deploy knowledge. And some of this knowledge you have to acquire by going to school, by training, and so on. So you go to Aba, and people have done apprenticeship and they've gotten to a certain level. Now is the time, whether it is a polytechnic, private sector created or public sector created, that will now be addressing the gaps and the needs of Aba manufacturers. Mm-hmm. If you are Nnamdi Azikiwe University engineering, this engineering must be understanding what Innocent Motor is doing, finding out the gaps, seeing how they can produce parts, seeing that is the real engineering.
Sure, sure.
Somebody told me that if you want to make money in this country, see the zillions of abandoned tractors all over the country, because there's no tractor repair facility in country. If you go to local governments, once they spoil, they abandon them, and they can even donate it to you for free. And yet we have faculties of agricultural engineering whose mandate should include getting these equipments into place. So our curriculum are not in tandem with the current happenings, not to talk of the manufacturing sector. Things have moved so fast, and we really need to work extra hard because, you know, the fourth industrial revolution is around the corner. As my son is already here, very soon you are going to have autonomous driving. We are saying we are labor abundant, but robotics will displace the labor because they're even more efficient. The one that frightens more is actually machine learning. When machine can make mistake and correct itself, which is the advantage humans have, then I think all of us will be looking for something else to do, because machine will make a mistake and correct its own error. So we have a window, because these things are not massively deployed yet. They are expensive. Now is the time for us to deploy, because the productivity that is engendered by manufacturing is what also transfers to agric. And that's where the productivity of labor in agric is enhanced. And that's how wages are increased, and that's how incomes are increased, and that's how poverty is alleviated. There's no magic. Yeah. So we need to go back to training. vocational training. You know, every technical school, every polytechnic wants to be university. I don't know why. We don't need them to be universities.
But you
We
see,
need this
Oscar, part of
specialized.
the problem is the prestige of the Nigerian environment. They
Yeah,
forget that a plumber can drive up in his BMW to fix your plumbing in Germany.
correct.
So, you know,
So the idea that everybody must get a degree, an engineer has a role, a technician has a role, a vocational skill person has a role. That's why, by the way, industrial policy is not a matter for the Ministry of Industry. I have to keep harping on it. Just like science and technology policy is not a matter for Ministry of Science and Technology. Because there's science and technology policy in education, in agriculture, in industry. Similarly, industrial policy involves education. This thing we're discussing about technical skill, curriculum, getting the universities to now begin to address the new needs. That's part of industrial policy. It cuts across sectors, and we need to bring this knowledge to bear. Thank you, Pat.
yeah. Thank you so very much. Engineer Joe Makoju was cut off. I think he's back now. If you could please respond to the question I was posing to him.
Thank you, Pat. You did raise a point about what we are doing in Dangote, the area of skills acquisition.
Right.
We do have what we call the Dangote Academy. And what it does is just focuses on producing various levels of technical skills. We take inputs from technical colleges and from the universities at various levels. We have a collaboration with GIZ of Germany, and the academy is located at our biggest plant in Obajana, Kogi State. And we have various levels, starting from the lowest level of vocational, and then we go on to the technical craftsman skills. Then we go on to the engineers that will supervise the technicians. And then we also have non-engineering courses, you know, for commercial business management. And the issue is producing technicians, engineers, and managers for our factories. We have factories in 10 different countries in Africa. So the students are not only from Nigeria, we bring some from other countries and train for them. This is actually a model which I believe falls in line with some of the things Professor Osita is talking about. Like he mentioned, things about if you truly want to make a big step with industrialization, I think this is a model that will address the issue of the challenge of the human capital. And also goes back to the example one made about Steve Jobs' iPhones. The Chinese already had the training infrastructure ready. This Nigeria should be looking ahead and thinking this way. And because Nigerians are very good at IT. It's now known worldwide. So we have that advantage already, and we should build on it. Another point, a very important point I want to come to is the point that Professor Osita made about planning, industrial policy and planning. What has happened is we rush too quickly to advocate government taking its hands off the industrial policy and planning. Whatever successes we did post-independence was mainly due to government's leading role. I want to give the example of the cement industry. One of the few success stories as far as industrialization is concerned. To summarize it, even Chief was involved, He was Minister of Industries and is familiar with what I'm going to talk about now. Cement happens to be in an area we have comparative advantage. The comparative advantage in terms of abundant occurrence of the raw materials, and we have the fossil fuels to fuel the production process. In 1982, Nigeria was the largest importer of cement in the world. But because of a deliberate government policy, what was called the backward integration policy, that encouraged importers to invest in manufacturing, gave them targeted incentives, held them by the hand. We had big importers become big manufacturers. And today, Nigeria is a cement producing country, not a cement importing country, cement producing country, and we are exporting massively. And so I think government has rushed too quickly to hands off this midwife role for various areas in the country where we have. What has been done with cement will have been done in so many other areas. So the recent rush to hands off and say, look, private sector, come in and take over. I'm from the private sector, and the private sector is still very young and weak. It's not really got the capacity to take a vanguard role in this very critical area of industrialization. And I think this is something will come out of this series. This is one message that should go back to government, that we should go back to the days of national planning and giving direction to areas of focus, and so that government can provide the needed incentives and concessions that will attract investment into the areas where we can make accelerated development.
I fully agree with you. I think that the two challenges that are faced in that conversation is, one, the unfortunate mediocritization of the public service, in recent times, make people wary about, government involvement. But the naked truth is that you need government even during the structural adjustment debate. I remembered a comment at a structural adjustment workshop in Nairobi in 1986. I remember saying that what we need is more slim, lean, but mean and strong government.
Correct.
That is 1986. There was a conference, a workshop in Nairobi on structural adjustment programs in Africa. I also remember saying at that conference that government is not necessarily a dangerous commodity, because Singapore, most of what was happening in Singapore at that time was government. I gave a specific example of the Port of Singapore. At that time, it was run by PSA, the Port of Singapore Authority, which was a government agency. Their staff were as well paid as in any private sector and were just as efficient as any other. So while we need government not to be the kind of, bumbling, bungling, interfering, rent-seeking behemoth, as we sometimes have in parts of our economy, but we need a reformed government active in promoting that public-private sector engagement for manufacturing to be strengthened. So these are issues we need to bring to the fore of this conversation. And I'm glad that we're going to be able to continue this fortnight from now for the next 4 sessions. But let me say that it's time for some questions. Any of those who have joined us who would like to raise a question or make a comment can raise their hands electronically. And as they raise their hands, we will invite them to ask a question of any of the panelists, or just make a comment, but let it be brief, because we have to close this meeting at 4 o'clock exactly. So, is that an indicator in the, okay. Let me see what hands are up. So let's also make the point at this stage that the challenge of building up the manufacturing sector may require right now an audit of the manufacturing sector. And here we might need to collaborate with MAN to get a proper audit of where things are in the sector, and that perhaps a standing working committee can help really, and that's why, bringing in the raw materials, research and development people is important. Maybe even the Export Promotion Council, who was talking about the various agencies, sometimes working at cross purposes. They all need to take a holistic view of, Nigeria driving up competitiveness and becoming, seeking to dominate certain global value chains. And with that, we can identify endowments that we believe will be the thrust of industrial policy. Because if we're going to follow the ideas of latent comparative advantage and not seek umbrella tariff bans and high tariff rates, anyway, we're in AFTA, the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area. Many of these things are going to have to change. So, how do we, taking our endowments, develop industrial policy for specific endowments that will want to become globally competitive on their value chains? This will take working together, and therefore, when we make a choice, for example, in my thinking, of an area, an endowment that we want to become leaders in, we've got to make sure that even primary education in that area, my favorite example is sesame seeds. In a good part of the middle belt of Nigeria, they use it to make soup. But this is serious money that if people came in and invested and, educate primary school kids who are in that part of the country, get into their curriculum understanding of the value in sesame seeds, how to process them, how to do this. By the time these kids are secondary school level, they can be entrepreneurs that will run ventures around sesame seed in that value chain, such that when any hamburger place in Europe is starting out, they know that the sesame seed they will need on those burgers will come from Nigeria. Those who need sesame seed oil will know that it's going to be coming from this factory in Nigeria who produces world-class sesame seed oil, and so on and so forth. This will involve some coordination of public and private sector players, and how we work that up is one of the things that we're going to try and focus on in our next session. So, in the absence of any questions coming, let me raise one more question for our panelists. And I'd like to go to Engineer Ugu on this.
You want something?
The Manufacturers Association or civil society organization, business associations organization, have sometimes not shown enough, what's the word, strength in institution building for manufacturing, for example. Why is it that a man will exist and public policy travel in the opposite direction from where is in the best interest of the country? What is the problem with business associations not being effective? And I say this with full sense of responsibility, I, in 1998, published a book titled Managing Uncertainty, Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies. And my classic example in that book was a framework called the Emerging Economies Environment Framework. And the big challenge, what I call the predatory behavior of government, public officials in the environment of business, and the big sift that manages that is, of course, institutions that emerge from the activity of business associations and so on and so forth. Why is efforts in that area not working for Nigeria? Why does man seem so weak in the face of wrong public policy? You have to unmute. I can't hear you, so you have to unmute.
Hello?
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay. What I'm saying is that the comment you made about the disunity, lack of united focus or collaborative focus among the private sector associations is a painful situation. There's disgrace. We try to get the Chamber of Commerce, the manufacturers, NECA, all of us to run together. In fact, the Norwegian Institute Norwegian manufacturers that were supporting us at that time, we are encouraging us to come together. First of all, it will give us the resource base to undertake certain studies and investigations that will help us to sharpen public policy. But we didn't catch on it. We became so clannish. I want to be president of MAN. I want to be president of Chamber. I want to be president of NECA. We need to get out of that. There's a question you raised here about studying the market now, evaluating where we are. What do we have resources for? What do we have in the carcass of industries we have left? What can we undertake? So that unity of the private sector is important. And NESG helped to incubate, develop that idea. I think we should go back to that as a basic step, that the Chamber of Commerce, NECA, NACI, all of those small groups, we must come together to discuss among ourselves, articulate public policy, and relate to government together, not finding narrow, small industry interests. So that is an important element. But one thing I want to mention to you, when you talked about sesame seed, I believe that the comeback we need to make has to go and start back largely in agriculture. But if you look at the River Benue, whenever you fly over Nigeria, look at River Benue, where it starts from in Adamawa and goes all the way down to rivers. And you start from Niger State, all the way from Sokoto and Kebbi. You see, if you divide parcels of 10,000 hectares of land along those rivers, on both sides of the river, Nigeria will become the biggest rice producer in Africa. Nigeria will become the biggest sesame seed producer, soybean producer. You need to do certain big things like that to enable people to begin to operate at the scale that we need to make an impact and to succeed. We have an opportunity now. Look at even in rice. We talk about it, but we are still net importer of rice when we have the ecology to deal with it. So in my view, the starting point, if you're going to do a new, like Osita said, the fourth revolution in Nigeria, the fourth industrial revolution, or third one in Nigeria, let it be that we start from the agricultural area. I've gone from plastic manufacturing to various things and then ended up in agri processing. That's where you need. It deals with issue of food. It deals with issue of unemployment. It creates opportunity for us to tap into demand in the rest of the world. The rest of the world, in some areas, have gone to GMO. The rest of the world want to buy soybean from us, sesame seed from us, rice from us. So if you're going to go to a particular area, I would say that area will be agricultural processing and producing from basics by using our rivers, by using the natural waters we have and developing it in a different concept, not narrow, not 5 hectares, not 10 hectares. Open up every rice mill in Nigeria that wants to produce rice. give them 10,000 hectares on the river Benue or river Niger. And then within 2 years, you will see that they're producing rice and going from zero to final production. I think the whole value chain will be under our competitive strength. So you need to do something big like that, not switching around and trying to do that. But the question you raised about associations, yes, I've answered that. But I'm now suggesting that for us to make a comeback to industry, to manufacturing, we have to go back to raw materials that we can bring in Nigeria. Let's not go back to start assembling motor cars. Unless there are particular vehicles like small trucks, small activities we need to do in our country, which we can consume, we can put assembly plan for that. Finally, I want to thank you, Pat, for the effort you made to bring this together. I'm very grateful to see that Joe Makoju is strong and healthy and prospering. And Bamanda Tuko too, for me, I was joyful to see him today. Please, my appeal today is let's not give up. Let's not give up. Let's think new, unique thoughts, the way you are doing. You're not giving up part. Continue the initiative, it will be appreciated. But let us now open a new area. Let Nigeria become the biggest agri-processing country in Africa. And we can touch lives in America. We can touch lives in Europe. Europe and people are looking for raw materials, and we can produce them from virgin land. That's what is making me crazy. If I look at it every day and I agonize. So, Vico, thank you very much for the opportunity. Let's think big. Let's think big. Absolutely. Let's play with it. Joe Makoju, why can't we replicate Dangote in one or two other areas? Why not? You've done well already. You know how it's been. Thank you.
Yes, let's do more. Thank you. I'm proud because I am privileged to be the one that is in touch with everybody. There's nobody on this call I've generally not been in touch with through the years. So I'm grateful for that privilege. There's a question though from Anthony Bebo. Quick, 30 seconds. We'll take the question and then we'll close. Unmute yourself, please. Yeah, unmute. You're
okay,
still
yes.
muted.
Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you.
Okay, good. My name is Anthony Webber. I'm in New York. I've been studying about Nigeria and I come home regularly. The issue of security, I appreciate your effort. Thank you for all this, but security and justice, there's no way anything can happen in a country the way Nigeria is in terms of progress, because the country seems to be drifted into something nobody understands. What can we do in terms of defense, self-defense for the victims, in terms of justice and security? Because without that, none of this can happen. So what can we do to, like laser, focus on ensuring that we're able to turn around this threat, which is real? That's my question.
Okay, anybody want to answer the question? Osita. Okay.
Yes, I am here.
That's very quick, All right, let's take the other question and then see somebody answer both.
Okay.
If nobody's, I will try and answer as best as I can.
No, I've already unmuted myself. There's a hand up. There is a hand up.
Go ahead then. Security and it's critical for.
Well, the issue of security is not only a manufacturing concern. Is global, meaning global in Nigeria. I mean, so it's something that cuts across education, industry, agriculture, and so on. So, as somebody said earlier, these are things you think needs to be settled, both for domestic investment and for foreign investors. It's not just foreigners coming to invest. Actually, many Nigerians are holding their money in foreign currency. Many Nigerians are not sure whether they should invest in something that will yield something in 5 years. Many Nigerians are not certain as to where they should even live and settle. So these uncertainties that arise from insecurity are not anything you can minimize. But the first point I made was, well, while the security people are dealing with it, there are still other things we must deal with. After all, we're still teaching students in the university. Manufacturing is still going on, but not going on well. So we believe that that issue needs to be addressed and addressed properly. Thank you.
Pressing the wrong thing. Yeah.
Hello?
Sorry, Mrs. Aditula. Yes, please, 30 seconds. Unmute, please.
Yes, thank you. Mine is for Professor Osita. You mentioned something very important, which is very lacking among our civil servants, especially the various ministries. How can they be advised to try and attempt to coordinate programs and activities? They should try to think out of the box. Ministry of Science and Technology should not think it has the monopoly. Industry should not have the monopoly. All of them should work with education, with labor, with everybody. That is my own observation. And the last one, Professor Utomi, please look into the issue of this, our registration with Eventbrite. They are giving us headache. Today, I almost missed this program. I had to be calling and be texting your officials. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, I guess I have to bring back Professor Obu. You know, this business of inter-ministerial rivalry and coordination. I mean, it's one that we have all written and talked a lot about. Any quick closing thoughts on that?
No, the thing is, the agenda has to be set from the top. There's no gainsaying.
Absolutely.
You set the agenda from the top, and then you appoint the appropriate people to man these agencies, and then insist with monitoring that these things are happening. If, for instance, you know, NEXIM reports to Minister of Finance. Bank of Industry reports to Minister of Industry. So the two ministers may be working across purposes. And there was a piece I wrote earlier, and I said, if you want to bring these things together, bring them before you appoint ministers. Let's have this coordination take place, because ministers, they strive for tough. And once they take place, you know, if you lose your agency, you know, people don't look at the bigger picture. So the leadership must come from the top. And like you stated, Pat, we must agree on a certain trajectory. Where are we going? What are the necessary crops or areas in which we have this advantage that we want to focus? Therefore, we redirect them to focus on it and monitor implementation. I think that's how it's going to work.
Yes.
Yeah, no question. I am actually involved in a project currently in Edo State. It's an agri-industrial town that we are developing. And we need a trailer park. And who are we working with on that is the Ministry of Transport through the Shippers Council, you know. Then we are working with the Ministry of Agriculture, and everything is like a silo. So we're trying very hard to be the ones facilitating. We've made presentations from all of these places. I think that, you know, if we really want growth, the whole part of what Asia taught everybody is the power of clusters. Yeah. You know, and people will come from different ministries and all of that, but in that one place is one-stop shop. You get the clearing on everything. It's possible. These agency rivalries, if people are educated enough to know that it's the greater good of all that we are pursuing, people stop this tough business, and it's so critical. Okay, I want to extend warm appreciations to members of our panel, Alhaji Bamanga Tukur, Engineer Charles Ubu, Engineer Joe Makoju, and Professor Osita Ubu. We might come back to you to join these conversations as we continue. Like I say, we'll have them for the next 4 sessions, which is 8 weeks. for manufacturing. We just finished several weeks on the health sector, and we really look forward to further input to see if we can get these sectors right for the advance of the good of all in our country. Thank you all so much, and God bless.
You.
Have a great week.
Thank you indeed. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Engineer Charles Ndewo.
Osita, I want to talk to you. Please come to Owerri when you are here. Come by.
I was in Owerri. I will call you when I come again.
Please, please.
I was.
I'll send you my numbers. I'll send you my numbers, please. Thank you. Okay. Now this recorded. Huh?
Yeah, I go.
Hello.
How is Joe Makoju? Say it was nice seeing you again.
Yes, Joe, too. I look forward. These days I don't come to Lagos. You've driven me out because of the bad traffic.
Okay, so, let's get in touch on the phone. All the best.
I will do. Will do indeed. I'll get all the numbers. Thank you indeed.
Okay, bye-bye.
But keep well. The brain is still very active. I respect you highly. You know it.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.